I really like the idea. Advent is one of my favorite seasons because it's 5 minutes to Christmas. And I get to count it down sometimes by eating chocolate. But the idea, but the idea of it being this very communal existence, where we come, we find value, we find ourselves, and on some level for us individually, there's a sense of consciousness that gets elevated just because you were here. Such a beautiful idea. So this evening, as we engage the idea of the Reformation, I got excited about this idea for a whole lot of reasons, because I get to use all my book learning about the Reformation and understanding really what that is. And as I started to look at this, I realized, we've been at this now for about 2 months. And here we are 500 years later, but the question that really just kind of felt daunting to me was 500 years later, now what? Now who? Now where? And we've been engaging this conversation that has looked at our practices, our symbols, our rites, our rituals, and yet the question of what makes church church, it was given to me kind of as a guiding principle to move through an idea about church in this setting. And when I looked at this over and over and over again, I was like, how come I keep getting all the church stuff? Because earlier this year, we had our Badass Lady Preacher series, and I had an opportunity to engage the idea of the church that women built. And, I was just like, am I drawing the short spiritual straw? I didn't know what was happening. And so I went into the space of questioning the idea of church. What is this? Where are we? Where are we headed? And for me, it was very uncomfortable because one question led to yet another question, and I didn't have an answer to the previous 23 questions that I had, but nonetheless, I had to keep going because today was coming. And so it's my hope that what you hear, what you experience this evening, allows us to be able to stand in that space of questioning and to be able to be companions for each other, and allows us to really move through what might feel like discomfort, to move through the discourse of what happened way back when and then into who, and to beg that question in and for ourselves as a community of what is this to us. So here I am. The longer I live, the more aware I become, and I start to recognize that we live and work in an unfinished world. And as a pastoral leader, I realize that I have answered yet again something for me is kind of an unfinished calling. And I realize that what is ours to do? Is it to take up a mantle and raise a new standard? Is it to throw open our doors and invite in the other and the stranger? What is ours to do? What is this overarching idea of church as we know it? I believe that in order to engage Brian McLaren's next question, what do we do about the church? I had to embark upon a journey that was both long and short. It was a journey of just 16 inches, and it took me weeks to make that journey. It was a journey from my head to my heart, because the work that I get a chance to do in my bivocational life, I live here because it's comfortable, it's safe, nobody gets in that I don't let in. Nobody knows, nobody sees, nobody cares, it's all me. But to drop to my heart, it means that I had to be open to the thoughts, to the feeling, the awareness, and the presence of others, to be able to understand that it's not just all about me. It's not just all about any of us. It is really about the power of who we are choosing to become in this moment. So I had to entertain this idea, and I want to share with you a little bit of that journey for me. I was born and baptized into the Methodist tradition, where I spent my childhood up until high school. And for some reason, I picked up a fascination with the Baptist church, and that journey took me from adolescence through adulthood. From there, I eventually went away to college, and I ultimately traveled the world as a sailor in the United States Navy. And I went from what I call pillar to post, from non-denominationalism to Pentecostalism, all without warning. And I tell you this because I want to use my life as a story to kind of paint with broad strokes the idea of journey into this place. When I returned home, I found myself a student of contemplative practice and an advocate for peace and justice in the world. Eventually, I found myself employed by a denomination whose sole emphasis was the existence of social justice and equality for all. From there, I found myself enrolled in an Episcopal seminary and an intern in a New Thought movement, and all of that led me here. Now, here's the deal. When I showed up here for the very first time, nobody asked me to check my Baptist Methodist roots at the door. So I didn't have to stop being any of the things that I had ever been in my life and now become whatever this was going to be. I am here as a result of a very streamlined Google search because I started looking for open and affirming churches that were within an hour's drive of my home. And just for those of you who may not know, no, I do not live in the fair city of DeLand. I come from the far, far away place that we know as Orlando. And so I believe that this idea of the conversation about church, somehow, some way, it chose me. And so here we are. I take a step back, I look at my journey, and it almost resembles a quilt. Any of you, your mothers or grandmothers, fathers or sisters, anyone quilt? And they make these really cool things out of old stuff? Yeah, things that were now too small. My mom would cut them up into these various and sundry shapes, and she would sew them together, put a backing on it, put a little stuffing in it, and we were warm for the winter. So the idea of that warmth came to us out of the life of the old was kind of fascinating to me. This idea that these significant pieces of garments and experience and challenges, victories and lessons, all woven together and tied together with threads of something that I know to be grace and love, is actually intriguing to me. These threads are fascinating because no matter where we go, who we are and who we become, those threads can stretch, they might even entangle, but they will never ever break. So we are always connected in a way to who we were, because who we were feeds who we are, and who we are feeds who we shall become. So while here in this space, I believe that when we gather together in the presence of a table, we experience good music. We get an opportunity to talk. This whole discussion thing was fascinating to me because I came to the community around Christmas. I just thought it was like a Christmas thing. And I was like, what's up with the table talk? And so when I realized that this was truly an element that is a living part of our liturgy, it adds value to me. And it adds value to the voice of every single person in this room, because I didn't grow up in a church where I got to say anything other than amen, how much, and how long. Those are the answers to everything that I got asked. So even when we feel ourselves getting stretched and we get pulled into some of these directions, there is something that becomes very apparent. And it becomes apparent to me that in this very room, there is enough love for all of us. There is enough hope for each of us. There is enough joy for every single person who is here tonight and not yet, and it's all right here in this room. I have been in this room when there was nobody in here but me, but I could still feel your presence. I could sit here and stand here and look around the room, and I could call names, and I could remember answers to questions and stories that got told. All of these things are threads that feed into this idea of who we are as a community. So I had a friend who I told her my story about my journey to this place, and she asked me a question. She's like, girl, why do you always leave? And I was like, well, I hadn't quite thought about that before. And I realized that the reason that I leave is not about the people that I left behind, not about the structure from which I departed, not about the sacred text that the preacher used on any given Sunday, or the fact we had to sing all 18 verses of a particular hymn that made my head hurt, not the fact that we had a pipe organ and no drums. None of that. No. The issue was that I changed. Somewhere along the way, I encountered someone. I read some book, I perused some webpage. I wandered into a holy space that looked different from the one I was used to. And when I encounter these things, I am like bounty paper towels. I am absorbent. I take it in. And when I come out of that experience, I am not the same person that I was when I went in. And so being in all of those places, it no longer nurtured my soul. It no longer threw light upon the journey for me. And so off I went on my own search and idea through the world, through the internet, and thank God for Google, and all of these things that bring us together as community. You see, here in this room, some of us were sent. Some of us were called. But something drew us here, whether it's the idea of something different, something better, something as, I don't know what that building is, I'm going to go check it out and see what's going on in there. Something drew us to this place. But to sit in this place, I have retired what I call the opportunity to look for the church that I left in the midst of the church that has taken me in. So what I used to do doesn't really matter to me in this space, because I want to be fully present to the things I get to do. I want to be fully available to the opportunity to open what we call a service with a little bit of Sister Sledge. I mean, if my seminary professors could see me now. Because I always had what they called this radical idea about church. I am not a believer in the idea that we should all come in and conform to the rules. I am a believer that the rules should conform to us. You see, all of my life I have joined one community, one capacity or another. But I think that the idea to form a new ecclesia for the people that inhabit this planet right now, it's not about joining that community. It's about inviting all of those formal structures to join us right where we are. You see, Charles Dickens says in A Tale of Two Cities that it is a far, far better thing that I do than I have ever done before. I know that in your midst, I am a far, far better person than I have ever been before, and for that I am grateful. Other luminaries that have spoken to me in this time have been Barbara Brown Taylor, and she writes a book that's called Learning to Walk in the Dark. Inside of me is still a 6-year-old. I got night lights all over my house because I am afraid to go roaming around in the dark, and I know where all the furniture is. And she says this, she says, what if people were invited to come and tell what they already know of God, instead of to learn what they're supposed to believe? What if they were blessed for what they are doing in the world instead of chastised for what they are not doing at church? What if church felt more like a way station or a rest stop than a destination? What if the church's job were to move people out of the door rather than trying to keep them in, by convincing them that God needed them more in here, when the truth is we are needed more out there? A few weeks ago, we had an opportunity to engage a conversation about contemplative practices. And for as much noise as I tend to make, because every now and then I stand up, you put a mic on me, the inner Baptist comes out in me. So I was like, why am I the one that gets to talk about all the contemplative stuff? And my sister said to me, she said, you're the only one who knows how to sit down and shut up. But when we engage this, one of the things that was clear to me is that here is where we practice. Here is where we figure it out. Here is where we determine what's the difference between offense and defense. How fast do I need to move to get from here and there? Which way is this and which way is that? Who has the ball? Somebody said we're playing ball. But anyway, it is the place where we figure it all out. So when we go out there, those who encounter us, those who engage us in our living, in our loving, in our laughing, in our work, and in our playing, that they will be changed forever. Because they will have encountered the idea, the activity of love in their life, of love and light on their journey. That becomes the bread for which they are fed in the moment. So here we are 500 years ago. One person was fed up with the way that things were. And 500 years later, we stand in the shadow of the observance of the same. At the beginning of this series, Caitlin talked about Phyllis Tickle's idea that this is like the church having a great rummage sale. I echo that idea because I love a good rummage sale. But I echo that idea, and I think that it is more of the idea that we have a community garage sale. Because, see, when we have a community garage sale, because we just had one in our community, and I thought it was kind of neat, because I had to go through all of my stuff and figure out, what do I no longer need? What no longer fits? What no longer is cute? And what was I thinking? And put that stuff out in my garage and allow someone else to come and sift through it in a way that they would find something useful. You see, before we can get to the great rummage sale, we got to go through all our stuff individually, figure out what no longer fits, what no longer is cute, what were we thinking, and get it out of there. And our work is still not done. Because even though we have moved all of these things out of that space, now we get to engage what's left behind and figure out what coolness can we now create. Because we either have a little more space, a little more life, we have things that matter, and we have improved the lives of someone else by sharing and giving away and selling those things that no longer serve and support who we are and who we are becoming. Now, I feel like the person who's on the midnight infomercial who says at the end, just when you think it's all over, they go, wait, there's more. Wait, my friends, there is more. There is neither one or two. It is more than we could ever imagine. And the trick is we got to be willing to imagine what could potentially be. I believe that this community at its very root came out of the imagination of those who dared to ask the question, what else can we do? The thing that drew me in was one word in one of the branding elements of the collective, and it talked about a misfit community. And I went, well, I have always made a little bit too much noise. I am a woman, and every now and then people get a little weird when women say that they want to preach. You ever want to freak some people out, just say that and see what you get. And this idea of a space where the people who don't fit anywhere else fit perfectly. It's almost as if there is a U-shaped space right here waiting for you to arrive. We've been wondering where you've been, and now that you're here, now what? You see, Brian McLaren talks about this idea of church as one grand calling that tells us what the church truly is. I had to read through 16 chapters to get to the idea of what the church truly is. Good book, though. And here's what he says. He says that it is a space in which Spirit works to form Christ-like people, and that it is a space where human beings are formed in Christ-like love. They cooperate with Spirit and one another to express that love in word, in deed, and in action. Where that happens, he says, I believe that church is happening. Whatever the forms or structures, whatever the history or pedigree. When I read this for a moment, I understood the idea that church really is a school of love. And being a school of love, it does not mean that the byproduct of being in this space is love. Everybody gets 3 pounds of love. You can take that out and do what you will. Next week, come back, we'll have some more ready for you. No. It doesn't even really mean that love is the curriculum. It merely means that this is a place where it's okay that love dwells. And when we come in contact with pure love, real love, that Christ-like love, we have an opportunity to have a different experience of ourselves. That when we go out into the world every Monday morning after being in this space on a Sunday evening, you have a chance to allow the people at work, the people you encounter in public, the people you encounter on the beautiful I-4, to have a very different, loving experience of you. The more I think about the church, the more I realize that conceptually, it wasn't really built to change. It wasn't built to ebb and flow like a boat that gives itself to the waves. It wasn't really meant to stretch like our favorite sweatpants the second day we've been wearing them. No, it was built upon a rock to stand and to withstand. One of the luminaries in my journey is Anne Lamott, and she says this. She says, lighthouses don't go running around all over the island looking for boats to save. They stand and they shine. That's what I believe the idea of the religious institution was supposed to do, was to stand and shine. But the idea of the people, we have a completely different opportunity, a completely different experience to have of ourselves to shine. We have an opportunity to be able to be that focal point on a compass. I did a little research, so here goes. 89 degrees, 15 minutes, 50.8 seconds past our current position, and I'm about 5 minutes off. If viewed from another planet, would look differently. What I'm speaking about is Polaris, the northern star. If you are anywhere in the northern hemisphere and you are able to find the northern star, you have a shot of knowing exactly where you are. But when viewed from another planet, it looks just like every other star. Now, our lives are full of choices that we make, the things that overwhelm us in our own mind. And if we get lost and wrapped around those choices, what then will be our anchor? What is our beacon? Where can we turn? What will guide us from the space of darkness to light? I raise this question. What if our Polaris, our northern star, our guiding point is other people? What if it is the people whose lives touch our lives? The lives that we touch through love, in love, with love, reach out from the darkness and remind us of the simple possibility of light. As much as I want to avoid McLaren's underlying principle, the conversation about change, because if you ever want to freak out a room, just start telling them to do something different. Start talking to them about change. But here's the thing about change. I mean, you can resist it, you can ignore it, but you can't avoid it. Because I saw my birth certificate and I showed up here, I weighed 7.6 pounds and I was about that long. Where is that body today? Change happens to us. We find that in Ecclesiastes it said to us, time and chance, it happens to us all. You see, change happens to us. And when we change, we have an opportunity to both go and to grow and to be very different in our lives. You see, church is a place that it recognizes and it welcomes and uplifts the evolutional beings that we are right here and right now. McLaren speaks of church as the school of love, the place where love is sought. It is conveyed, it's visualized, it's spoken, it's held, and it's sent out into the world beyond these walls and beyond these doors. Most people believe that they are coming to church, but the idea of being church only happens when we depart this space. A thing that I used to do as a benediction as a closing service would say that our time of worship has ended. Now our time of celebration and our service begins. You see, I guess I could say now that the whole reason I left was all about change. Not about who they were, who they weren't. Just about who I had found myself to be. So finally, it makes sense to me, the idea that church is a place of becoming. A place where we get to become more fully the people that we were called into being to be. The place where we get to learn and figure it out. We get to grapple with what looks like the hard questions. We get to walk away sometimes with an answer, and sometimes we are the answer. You see, this is the place where it all collides. Our social locations, our economic status, our ethnicities, our stories, chapter and verse. Who we were, who we are, who we want to be, and who we are not yet. It all comes into being here. So this idea of church as a school of love, it doesn't happen to us, it happens through us. You see, church as an institution or a school of love, this is the choice, I believe. And I've learned that love is not just an action or an emotion, it is an actual state of being. And those who know love are hardwired with the impulse to be able to share our ideas and our desires to know that we have been heard and seen and known. It's a part of our desire to simply be community. That's what we're constantly sending out. I remember years ago, I call it the 80s, I saw a movie. I probably was the only one that saw it. It was an Eddie Murphy movie called Holy Man. And I don't remember a whole lot about the movie, but I remember one line from the movie. And that line is, there are signs and messages all around us. These signs and messages all around us. And just because we don't believe there is one doesn't mean that we have missed it. It just means that we may not be listening hard enough, or we may not be looking in all the right places. But nonetheless, those things are all around us. I also know that humanity, human beings, we're not the strongest species on the planet. We are neither the fastest nor are we the smartest. But the one advantage that we have is our ability to cooperate with each other, to support and encourage one another on the journey. We have a unique ability to ourselves to see ourselves in one another. We have a unique ability to hear our stories echoed back in the lives of our community. This is what helps us become this true school of love. Because in this space, this is the only church that I have ever experienced where the conversation was bidirectional, where there were more opportunities for output from the community than there were inputs from the raised space. So church has been a lot of things for many of us, and what it becomes, I believe, is up to all of us. It's just a matter of, are we willing to engage in that way? Here at Collective, from the call to worship to the benediction, it is obvious that we are indeed souls in the evolution and very epicenter of change. 500 years have passed since the last person stood present to all that he knew, and he saw a glimmer of light. It was not a train. It wasn't a truck. It wasn't even a sunspot. I believe that he saw what we call a constant. It is my thought and my hope that the idea, the ever-changing opportunity to reform that which we have always thought, believed, wanted, and missed, that we would take every opportunity to find it here in this space, not just moving things around and looking for it, but becoming that idea of love, becoming that presence of light, becoming that new idea of wholeness in the world, and realizing that we may be the only constant, the only light that some people may encounter, and allowing that to be more than enough for each of us. So as we gather as a community of love, we gather each week. We gather in the presence of a table formed by human hands. We gather in the presence of bread. Bread that's baked by loving hands. And we break it. We declare that even that which is broken is beautiful. It was Leonard Cohen who says that everything has a crack in it. That's how the light gets in. So we break the bread and we share it. We also take carefully the cup from the table, because this is a representation of love that is poured out and into each and every one of us. The thing that is so beautifully magnificent about this table is that no one is ever turned away. That when we come into this space, we come into a new existence of wholeness. A wholeness as community, a wholeness as family, a wholeness of love. So as you come, break yourself a piece of the bread, dip it in the cup, and partake of that, and know that in this moment, you are both loved and loved. Grace and peace.